Hi, I'm Dwayne Duggan, RE/MAX Boulder Podcast. Today we have Trevor Bellows with us. Trevor is the branch manager for Premier Lending here at RE/MAX Boulder. The reason we asked him to come visit with us today is because the lending world is changing a lot. Our original date was August 1st that we were going to have all these new lending rules that will affect both how they do business, how realtors interact with their customers, and how it interacts with the consumer. Now we've had a reprieve. I think it's to October 1.
October 1st.
In order to comply with these rules. So Trevor, thanks for being here.
Thanks,
appreciate your thoughts and wisdom to help our customers and clients out. So let's talk a little bit about what all these new acronyms mean. There's TRID, there's TILA, RESPA, CFPB, and all this stuff. Let's kind of do some definitions first. So
Sure.
what's TRID, T-R-I-D? And let me know what they're going to eventually call it. Triad or whatever.
So we do have TRID coming, and TRID is the TILA RESPA Integrated Disclosure. And you've probably become familiar with the Truth in Lending
Sure.
form. You know what a good faith estimate is. You've heard of a HUD or settlement statement. The TRID disclosure is going to replace all of that.
Okay.
The TILA, or TIL, Truth in Lending Act, that was an act made back in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and it really tells what the borrower needs to receive disclosure-wise. They need to understand what they're going to enter into a loan program, some of the rules, the terms, etc. And then RESPA is how a lender has to ensure that the lender or lender institute is giving these disclosures, what papers have to go out. So RESPA has come together and put together the new TRID.
Okay. So this sounds like we're trying to work toward less paper in our business. Is this less paper or more paper, you think?
This is less paper. That's a good
really?
question.
So in the long run,
Yes.
this could mean less trees die because of these
Yes,
rules,
it is.
right?
It is less paper.
Right. So let's talk about what that CFPB is. What the heck is that and where did it come from?
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What they are, it's a branch of the government. It's independent. It came after DoddFrank in 2010. And as a result of some of these, the Dodd-Frank rules, they came along and they're the ones that are going to ensure that we're doing TRID correctly.
Okay. So Dodd-Frank, I mean, we're starting to kick this around a lot, like, well, that's Dodd-Frank. What is Dodd-Frank? Is it the name of somebody that introduced these bills? Tell our customers a little bit about what Dodd-Frank is.
Well, without going
Sounds like a disease, sort of.
Yeah. Dodd-Frank was an act, and really what it's doing is it's an act that's helping protect the consumer. It was very, I don't want to say it, but I'll say it. It's easy to mislead people in the mortgage industry. And with more regulation, with more experiences that have happened, Dodd-Frank, among many of these other acts, are coming together to help prevent that and make more transparency for the consumer. This new TRID, the closing disclosure and loan estimate, is really going to be transparent for the buyer.
Okay, that's good. So what does this mean from the lender point of view? Is it more work, more timeliness? Do you have to hire more people to comply with these rules? What's it mean timing-wise? All that stuff.
Sure. So for the lender, it's right away it's an adjustment. We're getting used to these new forms. We won't have our good faith estimate or truth in lending any longer that we've had for decades. But it also means new timelines. The biggest part of this is that the lender is now going to have an obligation to get the consumer their final amount to come to closing, their closing disclosure 3 days prior to closing, or 7 days before closing if the lender decides to mail it.
Okay, and so in the past, it seems like on a lot of closings, we would actually get the numbers the morning of closing. So that will not happen anymore, right? If it's delayed or they receive their numbers that morning, then you have a closing delay for how many days then?
Well, then you're going to have another reset the clock period of 3 days, yes.
Okay, so if we line up the dominoes in the closing table, like several closings in a row, that could be a big problem if there's one little change like that.
Correct, and so we do have to have the final figures 3 days before closing. If anything changes that's not a benefit to the borrower, then we have to wait yet another 3 days, which, as you know, in your world could really derail some transactions.
Okay, and so in reality, you might have to add a staff person just to make sure that everything is on top, really.
Yeah, that's true. It's especially in our closing department. Our closers, They're the ones that'll feel the pressure of having everything pulled together, working with the title company. Title company has these changes as well. The two of them will be working together to have
Right.
the final number done before
Okay.
closing.
What about the consumer? What will the consumer see in these changes?
Right. So the consumer, they benefit the most, which is the design. And the consumer is going to first see a loan estimate instead of a good faith estimate and instead of a truth in lending. They're going to see a loan estimate, which this time discloses how much money they need to come to closing with. Believe it or not, the good faith of yesteryear didn't have
Didn't really show that.
No.
Right?
The good
Yeah.
faith of yesteryear also didn't show who was paying certain fees. So owner's title in Colorado, typically the seller pays for that. Well, it looked like the buyer had to pay it in the good faith estimate.
Right.
So this new loan estimate coming out really spells out everything for the buyer. They can understand their costs, their down payment, their monthly payment. And then the closing disclosure, once everything has become finalized from the loan estimate, they're going to have that 3 days. They'll have time, 3 days before closing. They'll have time to get to the bank. They'll have time to review it. If they want an attorney to review it, if they want their agent to review it, etc.
Okay, is there ever a circumstance where they might be allowed to waive the 3-day or the 7-day requirement?
Boy, it's rare. It would have to be a bona fide emergency, and it would be, well, it wouldn't be a good thing. Let's put it that way. If they have that type of emergency, they probably won't go through with it.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the bona fide emergency is yet to be defined, and it'll, I guess, kind of be determined by what underwriters
Yeah.
make decisions on and test the rule, I guess. So.
Correct. So the emergency would be something the underwriter would need to approve, but Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the institutions would ultimately have to approve it.
Right.
Is an underwriter going to be brave enough to do that? I doubt it. So I wouldn't count on any exceptions to the
Gotcha.
3-day.
Okay. What about from the realtor point of view? How are realtors going to need to do their business differently as far as closing timing, or what are your thoughts on how we'll work differently?
So I think realtors are really going to, two things they need to focus on in the beginning. They really need to understand having a 30-day closing or a 45-day closing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's sometimes more appealing to a seller to have a 30-day close or even less. But in the beginning, we might want to try 30 to 45 just to make sure, since we are adding an extra 3 to 7 days at the end.
Are 30-day closings a thing in the past when you're getting a new loan then?
No, we're still doing them.
But once this goes into effect? If
Everything
goes perfect, I guess it could still happen.
If everything goes perfect, a 30-day closing will still happen. Absolutely will still happen. I think we just need a month or two to adjust and get used to the new way. By the end of the year, I don't think this will even be something
It'll all be something we can't become accustomed to.
Yeah. And then the second thing is the back-to-back closing. When somebody is selling their home, counting on those proceeds from the sale of their home to buy the new home, and they're going to do it all on the same day. You know, if that buyer, something happens with the lender that's doing the loan for the people buying their home, oh boy, if they all of a sudden have to experience a 3-day wait, then we're going to have to experience one on our side too.
Okay, that brings up a question, like when does that 3-day clock start? Is that like a wet signature, or is DocuSign, like electronic signatures, is that going to be okay, or how does that start the clock?
That 3 days is going to consist of business days and Saturdays, no holidays and no Sundays. So we'll have to be mindful of those.
Good point.
Yeah,
Right.
with the holidays coming up. But it's from when the consumer receives their closing disclosure. And how do you verify the consumer received the closing disclosure? We can either use DocuSign, as long as that buyer goes in and signs, yes, I received this.
Okay.
Or good old snail mail. And if you send snail mail 7 days in advance, then we'll be okay as well.
Wow. So, but actually the electronic signatures would be good, because then you'd have a specific time that it was signed exactly, so you would know exactly when the 3
Yes.
days or 7 days were up.
Exactly.
As opposed to snail mail, because who knows when they get their mail, right?
Right.
I mean, is it going to be that specific, like 3 days based on they got it at noon, so you can't close until 3 days after noon, or is it
3 full business days?
3 full business days?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're going to have to become accustomed to to all those things. So.
Well, and to that point, right now, the world that we're living in, if the APR changes, if it goes up by 1/8 on the consumer within 3 days of closing, closing's off. We have to wait another 3 days. So again, I don't want to bring too much alarm to this because I think it'll become as easy as that is today.
Okay.
So,
How about just a quick summary of what it used to be like compared to what it's going to be now?
So what it used to be is you had a good faith estimate that was somewhat confusing in the very beginning. You held that good faith estimate all the way to the closing, and the day of closing you might get your final amount, and it might be surprise, higher or lower. So not good. Now what's coming is we're going to have a nice new loan estimate that's easy for the consumer to read. We're also going to have a closing disclosure 3 days prior to closing, and they'll know exactly what they're going to have at closing.
Okay, sounds good. So it might take us a little while to adjust, but anything else that you'd like to share with both realtors, public, or lenders relative to this new procedure we're going to be using?
I think that's all. You know, we might have a couple of stories, if you will.
Right.
But I think everything is going to go fine.
Okay, thank you, Trevor, for being with us today. And it's probably not as bad a deal as we thought it was, because again, as we all get used to it and incorporate it into our business systems, it'll all work out good and hopefully be a benefit for the consumer in the long run. So thank you, Trevor. Dwayne Duggan, RE/MAX of Boulder podcast, signing off.